Welcome to another episode of the Laura the Library Lady podcast, a production of the Massillon Public Library.
Join us as we celebrate our 125th anniversary during our podcast series, The History of the Massillon Public Library. We've come a long way since the McClymonds Public Library first opened in a house on the corner of historic 4th Street and North Avenue Northeast in 1899. Since then, we've moved to our current home, opened branches in Brewster and Navarre, and added bookmobile and outreach services. In this series, we're going to talk to some voices from the past as we explore our locations. Happy anniversary, Massillon Public Library! Hi, it's Laura the Library Lady coming to you from high atop the Massillon Public Library here in Massillon, Ohio. And we have a special guest with us today, someone I know pretty well, Dr. Barbara Wittman. Welcome, Barb.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to know if you'd tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I came to the library in basically 2002 and worked in reference for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. Then our head librarian, Sherry Brown, invited several people from the Ohio Historical Society to come up to the library and look at our documents in conjunction with the 200th anniversary of the state of Ohio. The folks from Columbus wanted a few of our documents. 2 or 3 would be just fine. So we put out...
2 or 3 documents?
Yeah, really.
We have a lot more than that.
Well, they were making rounds of all the Ohio libraries
entities,
looking for primary documents. So we put out about 100 for them. They were quite overwhelmed.
Oh, my goodness.
And the idea came up, heavens, we ought to be digitizing this material.
Right. And so, let me backtrack a little bit and tell everybody the Massillon Public Library holds what's called the Rotch-Wales collection.
Right.
And I wanted to know if you would explain to everybody
what
is that?
Was.
What is the
Right.
Rotch-Wales collection?
Well, to make a long story short then, Sherry Brown acquired a grant for this library to digitize this vast collection that is known as the Rotch-Wales Papers from the original settlers who arrived in this area in 1811. Now, to backtrack on that a little bit, you were asking me about my background. Oh, I'm sorry, I never got to that.
Anyway, a little bit more.
After taking a look at this vast collection of papers, 15,000 somewhere in that neighborhood, according to Sherry's numbers.
Letters and documents and all kinds of things.
I decided to do my master's degree and also my PhD at University of Akron on this settlement here in Ohio. Quite astounding, as I said, 15,000 documents. The collection extends from our earliest papers, which is a will. The date is 1688.
The last will and testament from 1688.
This is the last will and testament of Joan Fole Borden. This would be Charity Rotch's ancient ancestors.
Oh, my goodness.
Who settled this country, part of the settlement of this country, in the 1600s.
Wow.
All of this material is beautifully preserved, and lots of it now digitized for you to look at.
Wonderful.
So
let me go...
go ahead there.
Let me go back and ask you to explain Charity Rotch and her husband Thomas. You mentioned them settling this area. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened when they came here to Ohio?
Well, they arrived here in 1811 after a long stay in New England. And I can give you the categories, the main categories, when you start thinking about this history of these two people. Historical background, I have a list of the categories. I'll get to that in a minute. At any rate, Thomas Rotch was the son of William Rotch, whaling family.
A whaling family.
The whaling family developed the trade in Newport and Nantucket before moving on to New Bedford.
New Bedford, Massachusetts?
Right.
Okay.
And therein, or thereabouts, Thomas met Charity, a young woman. She was born in 1766, a year older than Thomas, also from a well-to-do Quaker family, and that's the key thing here.
The Quakers?
You've got to think Quakerism, you see, when you're talking about early development and slave trading and even development of the spermaceti candle industry and whaling in New
that's from
England.
the whaling.
It's all about Quakers. So, at some point, Thomas had a fallout with his brother-in-law, Charity's elder brother, who had risen up in the family hierarchy in the business. They moved from New Bedford 4 years after he built a large, commodious house for her.
And then they moved out of
to
it?
Hartford, 130 miles distant from New Bedford. You see, the thing was, people moving more than 30 miles in those days was a big event. People
Right.
never moved 130 miles.
No,
They
we're
didn't do it.
talking previous to 1800, thereabouts.
Sure. Too far distant, bad roads, all that sort of thing. But Thomas then in Hartford began to worry about Charity's health.
Mm-hmm.
She had lost a baby, her first child, and apparently was never pregnant again, that we know of from reading lots and lots of
Journals and
women's letters to
yes.
her. She missed New Bedford terribly and all of her female connections. So the choice to move to Ohio country was really Thomas's and not hers. But she went along. She had, of course, no choice, right?
Not at that time.
So away they went. They moved then from Connecticut to Ohio country, crossing Pennsylvania. Charity sort of boarded with a friend in Wheeling, Virginia for a while.
Because it wasn't West Virginia yet. It
Right.
was all still
It was
one
still
big state
Virginia.
of Virginia. Okay.
While Thomas went off, made a little survey trip around Ohio, trying to figure out where he wanted to settle. So he ended up here in Northeast Ohio, primarily because we had a wonderful water source
Sippo Creek.
at Sippo Creek, right, and we were close to the Tuscarawas River.
Sure.
So once we get that sorted out, and good soil, of course, then Thomas has to convince a group of friends to migrate out here and join his settlement.
And by friends, you mean Quakers?
Sure.
Because they're called
lots
friends.
of them. Well, I'm not
right?
sure all of them were Quakers, but
Okay,
some of them
so
were
literal
Quakers
friends.
from Connecticut, for sure. So out they come with their skills, their tools, a little bit of cash, not much though. That was always a big problem, cash. But we'll get to that in a minute. So out they come to establish this settlement, and Kendall was platted, Thomas Kendall, platted Kendall, somewhere around 1813, excuse me. So the settlement grew and expanded, but there were always problems. Long-term investment in roads, we didn't have any. It was difficult. Traveling, getting whatever you could raise to a market. The other problem was, again, a shortage of money, cash, and banks, not really well established much as yet.
Because this was kind of the Wild West. Ohio was the West country. It was...
Sure. Wild country yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, at that time. And Kendall, for those who don't know, preceded Massillon and was located just about where Wales and State Street are in Massillon today.
Right. So anyway, where were we? Okay, the other thing was shortage of labor. Skilled and unskilled labor was always a problem. So those three things, money, labor, and what was the third one?
lack of a market to sell their
Sure.
items.
So this is all very complicated, and all these changes take place very gradually. And women, I'm happy to say, get inserted into the economy as independent traders. And you can see this in all these
really?
most wonderful records that we have. So what I'm saying, and then the most interesting thing, I think, three things. A, Thomas establishes himself as the local banker. He's lending out money to just about everybody and his brother, with interest attached, of course. So he's making a little money on the side, and he apparently, coming from a wealthy New Bedford family, he has access to money, right?
Okay.
Which few people did. I mean, how are you going to buy crops and tools and et cetera, and set up your own homestead if you don't have access to some sort of cash? So Thomas, smart guy, never missing a note.
A good businessman.
Lends money to all sorts of folks over a period of time, so that on his when he passed away, and I'll get to that in a second, 44 people still owed him somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000. They owed the estate $10,000. People had never gotten around to paying their debts.
I see.
I suspect some of them left the territory. Some of them were chronically bad debtors. There wasn't anything he could do about it, see? So his executors then tried to knock on the doors of these people to repay their debts, but it was an ongoing problem. So that's one thing. Thomas Rotch as moneymaker. Second thing is that the Rotches, both of them, attended the signing of the peace treaty between Native Americans and the American government at St. Mary's in 1818, and this was fascinating. Not a huge number of Native American tribes, Native American women sitting on this gathering, and the response of Charity and Thomas to what they were seeing transpiring before them, and it's in their letters what they felt.
Exciting.
Especially Charity was just appalled because families were being broken up and put off their land, essentially, for settlers who were migrating into the area. So I would say if anybody wants to do a doctorate or a master's degree, here's another fascinating subject.
And so you mentioned some of this is going to be found in the letters that Charity wrote and letters that she received. So I kind of want to get into how did the library get these letters?
Yes.
How did we get these papers known as the Rotch-Wales collection?
As you probably know, as you were director up at Spring Hill at one point, Irene Wales, who is the last person to have lived up on Spring Hill, descended by marriage of Arvine Wales, who was Rotch's first-hand man all the way around, found these documents in barrels in various outhouses up at Spring Hill. All
kinds of barns and outbuildings, all these little
weird little places in big barrels. She brought the things into the house, looked through them, sorted them out over a period of years. And then she befriended Ethel Conrad, who was the librarian here.
Head librarian.
In the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And Miss Conrad went away to University of Colorado, took a course on how to properly categorize these materials. Incoming mail, outgoing mail, who to, alphabetically, and were they personal letters or business letters?
I
so
see.
All of this material now is available. I should say the great majority of it is available online.
Because
rather than having people come in and finger through the material themselves, which is not a good idea, preservation-wise. You can go online and find the stuff.
All because Miss Conrad first cataloged them and
good old
separated them.
Ethel Conrad, brilliant woman right off the bat.
So
anyway.
I know if you go to the Massillon Public Library's website,
Right.
you can find them there under online resources, and then they would just go to local history and genealogy resources.
Right. Now here, that's exactly what you do, Laura. You go into local history resources, scroll down, look for Rotch-Wales. You will see Sherry Brown's general introduction to the subject. Then be sure and click on inventory and the documents that we have digitized, circa 800 roughly, over this long period of time. So you could find them and look at them online. You can also enlarge the piece to read it.
Yes.
So I can't tell you how fantastic it's been to work on this. So what I'm doing now is expanding. You see, I'm interested in all sorts of categories. I hope this isn't putting anybody to sleep, but...
And Barb, you have retired from the library.
Oh, yeah.
You were here for 20 years, but this is still your passion. And I see, that you're still researching through all of this, even through your
Research
retirement.
is the name of the game. Okay, here are the categories, folks. First of all, integration from England to New England. I told you about the Bordens, who are Charity Rotch's far descendants who arrived here in
Ancestors.
1638. The second thing that you can develop out of this long list of documents that we have here is the Caribbean slavery and the slave trade, sugar and tea. Sugar from the Caribbean plantations owned by slave-owning merchants. This we can also do. There's also lots of abolition in this and abolition movements in this material. Then we move on to the development of Newport and Nantucket whaling institutions, pre- and post-1776 developments again, we're still talking about New England. Then we got into the Quaker marriages, which is a whole different, interesting subject there. Charity's brother, Samuel Rodman, who was 13 years older than Charity, the last of 8 children born before her father died in the Caribbean on a ship. That's another long story, but great. He marries the eldest Rotch daughter.
Yeah,
William
they
Roach's
had some
eldest
brothers and
daughter.
sisters.
And 2 other marriages followed. 2 other Roach-Rodman marriages followed, including Thomas and Charity. So what does this tell you? Well,
Double brother-in-law and sister-in-law relationships.
they're consolidating resources for sure. Right?
Smart families.
Keep the money in the family. Know where it goes. Remember, we're talking about a shortage of banks at this period and financial institutions. So families, more or less, again, the big thing is you've got to keep it in the family and consolidate your resources. So that's exactly what the Rodmans and Roaches did, including, of course, the move out here. But unfortunately, as we said, Charity and Thomas had no offspring,
right,
because she lost her first baby due to diphtheria in about 1792, and there was no pregnancy thereafter that we know of. So they leave New Bedford on to Hartford. He's farming. He's bringing in merino sheep. They migrate to Ohio in 1811. We talked about Roach as banker, the Treaty of St. Mary's. Thomas opens a general store, and because of the shortage of cash, people are either getting things on credit or barter or exchange. Thomas, another interesting thing about him, he becomes postmaster of Kendal.
He was everything.
So that what this meant was, as postmaster, he didn't pay cash. He didn't have to pay for postage. In those, up until about 1840, the postage was paid by the person who received the letter.
I've heard of
Today,
that, yes.
we do it the other way around, right?
Right.
So Thomas, a huge influx of personal and business letters. Thomas, we have them all in the collection, thousands
Postage
of them.
free.
And he never paid it.
That's a good benefit to have.
He never had to pay anything on his postage.
Now, I do want to mention also, if folks are interested in knowing more about Thomas and Charity Rotch, they would want to visit Spring Hill Historic Home here in Massillon, their original home that they built, and which
Spring
was
Hill,
later
yes.
owned by the Wales family. So a lot can be learned up there, and they have a lot of great programs up there.
And the one final thing, I don't want to keep you too long, but Charity, when she died then, in 1824, you see.
Just a year after Thomas.
Right, a year after Thomas, her executors, Arvine Wales and Matthew Macy's, of the Macy family, folks, inventoried everything. I mean, every piece of everything in every box and cart in Spring Hill, and came up with a huge amount of material. Namely pots, pans, and goods that were imported. How was all of this imported on bad roads into this part of the country in 1815, 1820?
Right.
Even the roads were still bad in 1820. So the struggle went on. And then, most of all, is the Charity School at Kendall.
Right, that was established after she passed away.
Right,
That was
and
her
part of
wish.
these monies went to establish the school at Kendall for children from depraved families. And what we have here is all of the applications that their parents had to fill out about why these children came to this particular school. What were the social circumstances that brought these kids to this school?
Because it was like a boarding school that taught vocational skills, correct?
Right. The
Yes.
girls learned the traditional in-house skills. The young men were taught farming. Mm-hmm. So, slowly but surely, we see women inserting themselves into the economy, into the political world. So, as I said, there's so much to be garnered from this study. It's
It's astounding.
rather staggering, if you know what I mean.
Now, I want to mention Thomas Rotch founded the village of Kendall, but James Duncan was the founder of Massillon, and they coexisted for a while. And of course, the library is made up of the home of James Duncan, the original home of James Duncan. And then it was added on to, of course. So I did want to ask you, because it is our 125th anniversary, if you have any certain memories of the Duncan House or our library building from when you worked here. You were here for over 20 years. Do you have any special memories or any thing you want to tell us about the building here where we are?
This particular building,
Yeah.
well, of course, the basement is really key, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't there a column down there? Tell me about that column.
There is a post.
A post.
From Thomas's, or James Duncan rather, James Duncan's grist mill, which I believe was located about where City Hall was. So that was moved here, I believe, when the Massillon Museum was in our building with us. And so it's not original to the building, but it's from the grist mill. And that's the post with the ring on it. There's a big iron ring in it.
And then the other thing that's notable here is this. You remember the time that we had this very tiny museum over here in where Sherry's office is today?
Oh, right.
The
I
little
mean, that
tiny
whole
museum, just sort of a little cupboard. And before they moved down and built the big museum downtown.
Downtown, exactly, yes. And I know a lot of people in town remember the museum being here, remember it being, in our building with us, but a very separate entity.
Right.
And so that's always kind of interesting for people to remember that and
Right.
and tell us about it. So I know that you found some new information recently about the Roaches and the Wales Papers.
yes.
So it's kind of shocking, and I know you want to share it with us. Go ahead and share that shocking info.
I won't make it too long. But first of all, the matter of tea, T-E-A, tea, right? Everyone was drinking tea and anxious for tea and interested in when the next shipment was going to arrive.
From England, right?
Right.
Okay.
But where was England getting the tea? China.
Okay.
Now, in order to pay for these tea imports, the British tried everything they could, but had to resort at the end of the day to importing opium
Oh,
to China to pay for so much tea that was coming in this direction, i.e. from Europe, from China, because people went mad for tea here, you see. They loved this stuff. Remember, we're talking about a period when we didn't have clean water sources yet in this country, right?
right. So you're going to want to boil your water anyway. Might as well have tea.
So there was the tea, for one thing. How did we do it? That took me off to the East India Company.
Which
and
we all
opium.
learned about in 4th grade. You know.
Well, we're going to read it now in this expanded edition of the book I'm writing. We'll hear much more about it. And also the other thing was, let's see. Oh, gosh.
The opium really caught my attention.
Oh,
when
yes,
you mentioned
the opium.
That.
Well, when they did the inventory of Charity's goods, the goods that they found up at Spring Hill after the Roaches had both passed, here was a 1/4 pound of opium. So I said to myself, to wit, how did this stuff get here?
So that's where
Quite
your
interesting.
research
So
started.
I'm researching that, but essentially it came through the Roach connections, I'm sure, in Philadelphia, which is the main import city here. On this side, coming westward, everybody started in Philadelphia, went to Pittsburgh, filled up their wagons, and carried on down the Ohio River. So the matter of opium, which was used sort of medicinally,
that was
really,
my next question,
for
yeah.
all sorts of women's weakness, ailments, periods, and this and that and the other. And they didn't quite realize yet that this stuff was habit forming. Mm-hmm. So
Yes.
this gets us. So it's very interesting. I'm still working on opium and the China connection.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So
We're
a new
talking about
twist.
halfway around the world here.
Yeah, but a new twist to our local Rotch-Wales Papers with
Really,
the opium.
obviously, incredible.
Well, Barb, I want to thank you so much for coming in and talking with me today.
Well, I hope it worked out okay. We'll see.
Oh, it's been really good having you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you too.
Thanks for listening to the Laura the Library Lady podcast. Be sure to check out the rest of the episodes on the Massillon Public Library's YouTube channel. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many other podcast platforms.